Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jody Hammer, and I am the Global Reentry Career Services Specialist with the National Peacecorps Association, or NPCA, as you probably know it. I'm very happy to be here with you today to talk about the topic of, non-competitive eligibility and leveraging your non-competitive eligibility if you're interested in federal hire. So I wanted to introduce myself very briefly first. I am also an RPCV, having served in Ecuador from 1994 through 97, so a very long time ago, and yet I assure you it will feel like yesterday for so long. In so many ways, it feels like it was just a few years ago. It was such a formative experience for me, and I think for most people, in good ways and bad. I know that many of the people that we're working with right now have been unfortunately evacuated, and that's not an easy situation, and yet you've really proven your resiliency and determination to move forward or consider going back, all kinds of different things, whatever decision's right for you. So I'm excited to be here to work with you. I have been working in the career development field for many years. Most recently, before my current job here at NPCA, I was working with Peacecorps headquarters in a similar capacity, managing their RPCV Career Center. So doing a lot of the same types of work. So I'm just thrilled to be on board here with NPCA, working with in my passion area, of job coaching and just, working with, helping people with thinking about what's next and resumes, cover letters, all of those fun things that most people do not enjoy. I actually enjoy greatly. So I'm excited to be in this role working with you and working with my passion population, and that is the returned Peace Corps volunteers. Obviously, deeply committed, not only because of my own, membership, if you will, in this huge group, 220 plus thousand return volunteers, but just I love working with RPCVs because you all are so you're talented, you can really take the ball and run with it. You can move on a dime, as change on a dime, and really you're adaptable. All of those transferable skills we've been talking about in recent webinars that I've been doing. You're just a really talented population. So I want to just assure you that hang in there and do the work that's required, and keep that positive attitude, as hard as it is sometimes. Keeping that positive attitude, especially in light of recent situations and happenings in our own world, very sad things that are going on. Really, just try to keep going forward one step at a time, and eventually, I promise it will work out, and you'll find that next step, whatever that may be. So that's what I have to say for my intro. I'd like to just allow Jonathan Pearson, a colleague at NPCA, to introduce himself as well.
Well, hello everyone. Jonathan Pearson. I'm the Advocacy Director at National Peacecorps Association. We are very fortunate to have Jody and her colleague and boss, Dan Baker, on board. They've done tremendous work in just a very short time to get this new global reentry program up and running. And I served as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Federated States of Micronesia back in the late 1980s. I was asked by Dan, and I'm glad he reminded us. Hopefully you all are signed up for and receiving global reentry updates. If you received this week's, you would have seen the statement from our president, Glenn Blumhorst, about the horrific killing of Floyd George in Minneapolis, and the confluence of events that all are impacting and unfortunately highlighting the vast racial disparities within the country. As a follow-on to that initial message today, NPCA is encouraging its members and community at 2 o'clock Eastern today to set aside at 2 o'clock 8 minutes and 46 seconds for reflection, for consideration of the challenges we face as a nation and as a community. And I know all of our staff will be doing this, and I know messages have been going out on this through social media and elsewhere, but we just wanted to send that reminder to you. So thank you again for joining. Thank you for your service. And Jody, back to you.
Great. So let's go ahead and we'll kick this off. What I do want to, just before we move into the specifics very quickly, and for those of you who've already tuned into many of our webinars, we just, as a standard practice, to get the word out about our services and what we're doing, what we're offering, and of course everything's free. We're just doing a very quick review of what the Global Reentry Program is, and how we like to think of it is there's 4 pillars to the Global Reentry Program, right? The first pillar is largely the one that I'm focused on, which is the career services. So doing everything from webinars, right now everything's virtual, right? To helping people as they think through if they have questions, answering questions from individuals, and looking at how we can do eventually perhaps career fairs and maybe virtual career fairs in the meantime, and all kinds of things to help get the word to you and help you in your career and transition assistance. Okay. The second pillar is really the education pillar, and that's really helping connect people to educational institutions and programs that are offering, for example, special acceptance. Many institutions have actually reopened their application process and allowed just for the evacuees to allow them to compete, to get in. And many of them, if you do get in, you get really nice financial aid packages. There's just a lot of, I think, solidarity around the whole, what's happened to you as an evacuee and having to come back before your time's complete, and all of that. And people really, and institutions, want to help, and so in whatever way they can, they're trying to do that. So that's kind of the second pillar, if you will. The third pillar, and a very important pillar, of course, is the well-being, right? So your own, providing emotional support. There have been some great webinars that have been done. I think one up in New York was a great one that had a lot of people on it about a little less than a month ago, maybe. And so just tips and resources for, remaining resilient and getting the help that you need to transition in this, unexpected time and difficult time. So that's that pillar. And then finally, we like to call it's the continued service, right? Instead of COS meaning close of service, which it traditionally has meant, that's the acronym. We're trying to really change that to more of continuation of service, because the reality is many Peace Corps volunteers go on, and it's fuel, their Peace Corps service fuels a lifetime commitment to doing volunteer work, or to maybe working in the nonprofit arena and affecting change and really, advocacy efforts, things like that. So it's a really exciting, it's exciting to see so many people that do already, really continue their service, and we want to just promote that. So we're kind of like a clearinghouse, if you will, trying to connect people with different resources that exist, right? So we are trying to coordinate too, like with the headquarters, so that we are complementing each other's, efforts and work, so that we can do even more for you. That's the goal. So, so let's go ahead and talk NCE. So what is NCE? So non-competitive eligibility, right? First of all, this is specific to federal jobs. So if you are not interested in working in federal employment, in any kind of federal job, this wouldn't be applicable to you. I mean, you're welcome to continue sitting in and take the information and share it with friends and your cohort. But NCE is for federal hire, and it's basically a special hiring authority, right? That permits, and the key word is permits. It does not require the agency to hire you. It permits them to bring on somebody with non-competitive eligibility or other special hiring authorities, right? Easier, quicker, without so much red tape. I mean, the bureaucratic process of federal hire, it's extremely bureaucratic. It's extremely long. I mean, oftentimes it's, it can be a 6-month, proposal easily. And that's just not acceptable in many ways, and they're trying to do things to make that faster, and they've made a lot of progress. In the 12 years that I was in headquarters, there were some changes that came down, that made it better, but certainly still a lot more bureaucratic than your non-federal hire things. So special hiring authorities are great because it allows people to come on board faster. So federal agencies love NCE. For example, currently on the career link, which is Peace Corps agencies, jobs board. Right now there are, I think, 700 and some job vacancies that are on there. You can get to it very easily. Jonathan, maybe you could just drop this in the chat box. It's peacecorps.gov/career link, all one word. peacecorps.gov/career link. And that'll take you right to this huge jobs board, 700 plus. And you know what? About a month ago, it was at 1,000 jobs. So that was huge, which is interesting in light of the crisis and everything going on. There were still a lot of jobs available there. And of those 700 that I saw just today, I think it was 290. It was a good percentage, 200 and some, were excuse me, were non-competitive eligible NCE, like they were doing an NCE posting, meaning the employer was posting a vacancy saying, you are eligible to compete for this only if you have non-competitive eligibility. So it's a call up that they do, and they post them all the time on Peace Corps headquarters website, right? Because there's an easy system that's very automated. It gets the word out to a lot of people. Employers love NCE because it's so much easier. It's so much faster, right? They can bring you in without, like I said, so much red tape. So it also, so those NCE vacancies are only available, like I said, to if you are, if you have the special active NCE, and that's the key. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. But NCE you get generally for a year, so within that period of time. But if you finished your service 5 years ago, you don't have NCE anymore, so you couldn't compete for an NCE vacancy. You wouldn't be able to come in through that form. And it's like I said earlier too, it's not an entitlement, right? They don't have to hire you, but it's a way for them just to really cut through, like I said, that red tape. And so it's advantageous for them, right? So here's the language. I mean, it's, complicated when you hear all of this. You'll want to, reference this, and don't worry about trying to take copious notes right now on what I'm saying or, what's on the screen. You're going to all get that. You're going to receive within a couple of days, you'll receive the follow-up email to this, and it will include a link to this webinar. So you can go back and listen to it or look at the, slides, just and get the information. But basically, the technical language behind NCE, right? It's granted under Executive Order 11103, the CFR, regulatory, authority, that means something to HR professionals, right? So you want to have that accessible, but that's also listed in your DOS, because your DOS is really your proof of your NCE, your description of service, and it'll have, or then they'll have their, they'll have like a DOS that you can, that is separate, or sometimes it's written within it, but that is your proof of showing, that you have non-competitive eligibility, right? So generally, to get it, and this is where there's an exception right now, and I'm going to have Jonathan in a moment talk about that on the next slide, but typically for standard NCE, this is pre-COVID-19, because we're in a different world right now. Pre-COVID-19, you typically, if you, in order to compete, in order to qualify, excuse me, my throat's scratchy here, in order to be eligible, you must have completed at least a year of your Peace Corps service, right? Of your Peace Corps service, including your training, right? And have been separated for reasons beyond your control. So if you just decided, you were going to ET, right, early terminate, you wouldn't be eligible for NCE. But if you maybe were medically evacuated and couldn't go back, or things like that, then you would have, gotten it. Okay. Now, there is an exception, as I said, right now with COVID-19, the NCE exception, which is no small feat. This is huge, because changes to NCE require, like, it's an act of Congress, basically, or almost. It's very complicated. So Jonathan, if you just want to very just briefly, I mean, as you see here, the COVID-19 volunteers, right, will all be granted NCE as long as you swore in as a volunteer, is my understanding. So as long as you'd sworn in after your 3-month or whatever your PST or pre-service training, you would then get, whether you were there for 1 week, 1 year, or your full term. But Jonathan, I'd love you to just talk a little bit, if you know anything about kind of how that came to be. I know, who spearheaded it. I'm sure you, as the advocate that you are, helped that along as well. So.
Well, thanks, Jody. I'd just say over time, even pre-COVID, we've heard from members of the community, and at various times have tried to make the case for expanded opportunities for non-competitive eligibility. We unfortunately have not been successful, but I think in part because of that, and because of advocacy on behalf of our community, or by the community, I should say, and with the circumstances of COVID, Director Olson and her team decided to make this extension. The one slight caveat, as I understand it, one of the slight caveats, as I understand it, is that, as Jody Hammer said, the Nce extension is if you served at any point for any period, you were sworn in and serving, with the one caveat that based on the view of the country director and his team, that you would have been successful in completion of your service. So assuming that applies to most everybody, that's the case, as Jody said, a big extension where people that serve less than a year are eligible for NCE. And then I saw that Duan was noting here about the circumstances with response volunteers. Jody, I'll just read what he's written here.
Oh, sure, thank you.
I think for Peace Corps response, he said, there have been several emails about this. At first we were not, then we were. I served 19 months and was evacuated from China, then Ukraine, 5 months short of my 2 years. What's the scoop? I don't have all the details on this. This is what the one part that I know is that my understanding is that Peace Corps has looked to extend for response volunteers
That's
1 year but only for Peace Corps positions.
That's right.
The issue I think there, as I understand it, is that the executive order that Jody referred to was issued all the way back at the beginnings of the Peace Corps by President Kennedy. And so that's the guidance that Peace Corps goes by. Yeah. And there was no response program back then. So I think that's one of the issues that they are being faced with. So, the director it would be my understanding, has the authority to extend the NCE to response volunteers for Peace Corps, but but doesn't have the capabilities under current regulations to do it just across the board. We have been trying to work on that. I'll kick it back to you, Jody, and we can talk about what we're trying to do a little bit later. So back to you.
Yeah, and that's my understanding too. I remember when I was working at Peace Corps, we were talking about NCE. It was, you'd say it literally would have taken an act of Congress to change, and that likelihood was so, like non-existent. But I know whatever happened with, because of the severity of the evacuation, I mean, never has Peace Corps experienced anything like that. I mean, the most extreme one beforehand was Ebola, which was like 3 countries we evacuated. And, while that was, trying and difficult, this was the entire Corps. That's just unheard of. So, and I know that there is, we can come back if you want to the 3 years, should we talk about that now, the initiative?
We can, yeah, sure. There has been some talk about trying to address this. I will say we have raised the issue with Congress about this, the circumstances with response volunteers and trying to broaden out their opportunities. I'm actually going to be on a call later today with staff of Minnesota Congressman Dean Phillips, who has legislation in place and I think has been attempting to try to do something around NCE. There's a number of bills that are in the works in Congress right now, and a couple of them have attempted to or still have some NCE provisions in the works. I believe, if my memory serves me correct, there is one bill I don't have the number, and maybe I can try to find it and review it, where it's a bill that infects AmeriCorps uh, candidates as well, that does propose extending NCE to 3 years. I'm sorry to go on, and I'll keep it short here.
No, it's fine.
There's a report issued this year by a special commission that was put together on service, military service, public service, and national service. And their final report came out this year. And one of the things they recommended in their report was extending NCE opportunities for 3 years.
Yeah.
There is a bill, I think in both chambers of Congress, that tries to take some of the suggestions of that commission and incorporate them into legislation. So there is some effort. The one other thing I wanted to add is I have heard from a couple of staff of congressional offices that have been trying to work on this, is that unfortunately there is some pushback that Congress is receiving from the Federal Employees Union in terms of that extension or extending much beyond where things currently are. So that's one of the, this is something that is not free and clear with no opposition. There appears to be some challenges that are being faced, and it's something we're continuing to monitor and try to raise, and certainly you all should as well.
Yeah, great. Awesome, thanks. And I guess I do want to say one thing just to follow up with what Jonathan was mentioning. With the advocacy, he was talking about how we're advocating and we're, talking with, congressional leaders and just trying to advocate for these changes. This is a great time for any of you who are able and willing, interested in helping with those kinds of advocacy efforts. It always means the most when there's people behind it who've been firsthand, personally impacted. And coincidentally, advocacy is such a skill that it's a transferable skill. It's something that could be very helpful for you in the future as well. So for folks who are interested, I wanted to just plug a webinar that we have next week that Jonathan is leading on, advocacy and advocating for the Peace Corps and, in general. And he's going to do a training on that as a webinar. So if you are interested, it is, I believe, next Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern time, and it'll be listed on our events calendar, which you can always reach at peacecorpsconnect.org/events. And you can register there if you're interested. We'd love to see you there as well. So great. Thank you, Jonathan, for all your information there. So how long do you have NCE? Right now, under the standard NCE, which has been in place, as Jonathan said, for eons, you receive 1 year of NCE, and it starts ticking down at your COS date. So I like to think of it as a clock, a 1 year time clock that you have that starts ticking down, and you traditionally will have it for 1 year. Once you get to that 1 year, it's done, right? However, there are some exceptions, and it can be extended for 3 reasons, which can be confusing, but I mean, most of them are pretty clear, but the third one's very confusing. But let's spend a little bit of time on this. So it could be extended. The first reason it could be extended is if at some point within that first year, when you still had the active NCE, you went to military service, you joined the military full time, your time clock would be stopped, if you will, or paused while you were in service full time, right? The same would happen if you went to, a pursuit of higher ed. If you went to grad school, for example, with being registered, enrolled full time. Once you start that, the clock stops ticking and it remains paused, if you will, while you're in grad school, right? Up to a certain point, and I'll talk about that as well, right? Up until 3 years, right? Once it can be extended for a maximum of 3 years if you extended it for a qualifiable reason that started within that first year, and then it would stop that time clock, right? Or I sometimes refer to it as a magic pumpkin date, right? Your 3 years. So if you COS'd or were evacuated, let's say you were evacuated March 25th, 3 years later, there's no way you will have NCE, regardless of what you've done, what you've engaged in, what you may be in a long doctoral program, who knows? But that's the magic pumpkin data that I talk about, right? So it can be extended. The third reason is a lot more, it's a lot foggier. It's a lot more vague, I think intentionally so, because it gives the hiring official, the hiring agency more discretion on how they, what they perceive as being a qualifying event. So if you engage in another activity that the hiring agency deems warrants an extension, let's say, for example, I don't know, you were doing some kind of a job where you were literally using the same skill set, that is in demand for this specific, the required job that you're doing. They don't have to. This is up to them. There's no way you can force them to do it. You can ask, you can educate them maybe on how it works, what the process involves, that kind of thing. But there's nothing you can do to force them. It's completely up to them. It's in their mind. If they deem some kind of experience would warrant an extension, or oftentimes it comes down to, would our HR deem this appropriate? Would this clear HR? Because HR is oftentimes more conservative, right? They don't want to break the rules and such, so they want to make sure. So sometimes, this one's used, I don't know how regularly it's used, but the first two are the clear ones that are used often, right? You can certainly make a case. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with making a case for your, for an extension. And, you could say, I wouldn't make it, but I would actually, when you're applying, you put your non-competitive eligibility, for federal hire, and then, your whatever the date, or just the, if you still have it, if it's, or if it's, getting close to the end, still put it on. I wouldn't emphasize when it ends, but when you engage with them, when you're in that interview, you wow them with your greatness, that you're this, awesome candidate that's really dedicated, all of that. And they find out, they're like, oh, NCE, how much longer do you have it? Well, technically I have it for 2 more months, and and that might be enough to have you get in, but it may be one of those things. But I have engaged, I don't know if you have, the ability to, honor the third reason for extension, which, is engaging in an activity or whatever that a hiring agency deems warrants an extension. A lot of times the formal language will say other activity or other work that the hiring agency deems warrants an extension. So you can always make a case for it. The worst they can say is no, right? But yeah, so that's a great thing. So let's go. I'm going to do a little example here. If there aren't questions, are there any questions that are coming in on NCE? And if they have questions on how it works?
Not yet.
Okay, and just a reminder, if you do have any questions about non-competitive eligibility and any aspect of that, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and then we'll go through. Jonathan's helping me very kindly, monitor the chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time that we have, and go from there. So calculating your NCE, I give this as an example, right? Because it helps you understand how it, when it would end, for example. So let's say, Megan, she's COS, or actually she was evacuated in this case, right, in March of 2020. She was home with, the stay-at-home orders and all of that until June. We're being optimistic here. And so, that used up 2 months, right? So then she's down to the 10-month remaining eligibility. And then she got a job and worked for 7 months, which took her up until or through January of 2021. So at that time, she was working. It wasn't a federal job. It wasn't something else. It was, it was working a job, so that doesn't count as an extension, right? So that would take her down to 3 months. And then she got into grad school. And she's a full-time student as of January 2021. And so she's in a program there. And so she, as of that time, she had the 3 months. It would be frozen, if you will, or paused. I don't know what makes more sense to you. Either one can be used. I kind of think of it as frozen, that it's going to stay at the 3 months while she's enrolled, up until, of course, the maximum of the 3 years from her COS date, at which time it would poof disappear. Right? I hope that makes sense. So my question is, so she graduates the following year, and in January 2022, when would her NCE expire? Just dump your answer into the chat box. Anyone who wants to take a guess. She graduates from that program in January of 2022.
Somebody wrote April of 2022.
All right, who wrote that?
Ivy.
Ivy, you win the prize. Exactly. So it would 3 months later, because once she graduates and she finishes her degree, right, or she leaves the institution, you don't have to have a degree, but if she left the institution for whatever reason, it would start, that time clock starts ticking down again. And then it may pause if you engage in a qualifying extension, a reason for extension. I know it's complicated, but and this is part of the reason I think too that there's this whole push to get this advocate for the 3 years, just the flat 3 years, because let me tell you, that's a lot simpler. It's a lot easier to just think of, okay, I finished this day, I have NCE for 3 years, and it also allows people to go back to school first, and yes, they could, but there's all that like complication of when does it has to be full-time, it has to be to qualify to freeze your NCE or pause it, whatever. So it would be much, much simpler. And actually, FYI, if any of you go on to work at Peace Corps headquarters, the agency as a staff member, because we have term limits, they have term limits there that basically limit you in general to 5 years. There's sometimes exceptions and extensions that can be granted, but in general, it's a 5-year rule that you take a job, that in 5 years you're going to need to leave the agency, and that's not, so you can't just get another job there and have another 5 years. No, it's 5 years in all of your positions combined, right? With Peace Corps. So because of that, because Peace Corps is an accepted service agency and we have the term limits, because we don't have that security long-term that most people in federal employment, if they're in the in the competitive service, they have jobs that, they don't end. You don't have time limits. And so to counter that, one of the things that Peace Corps agency has is you qualify for you have non-competitive eligibility. It's a different kind than this. It works very similarly, but you don't have to worry about these qualifying reasons to extend it up till 3 years. It's just a flat 3 years from the get-go. And I can't tell you how much easier that is to explain to people and to have people understand, to have employers understand, because this concept is, it's confusing. So they are really advocating for that. I would love to see that happen. Very much of an advocate for that as well. So fingers crossed, Jonathan, maybe there'll be some movement in that and you'll play a part in it. That would be awesome.
And actually, if I can take another second, because
Sure.
This conversation reminds me of something that was going on pre-COVID. Now, this would not impact the evacuees, as there are, as you noted, lots of NCE job positions being offered and federal positions being offered. But there are 3 members of Congress who served as Peace Corps volunteers. One of them is John Garamendi, who represents an area of California north of the Sacramento region. And he has a piece of legislation, again, this is pre-COVID, and there is an NCE provision in that. And this provision would address an issue that actually some of your predecessors faced about 18 months ago. The fact that if you were to come home concluding your service and there was a government shutdown, what would happen to your NCE status? As it stands right now, your NCE would just continue ticking because of the 1 year limit. The Garamendi bill would propose that if you came home in the midst of a government shutdown or a hiring freeze, a federal hiring freeze, or if you came back with illnesses or injury that rendered you disabled, that your NCE would be put on hold and it would not start until those situations were rectified. So another matter that is proposed, a long way to go in that effort. It's part of a much more comprehensive bill, but that's another thing that we've been working on.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Jonathan. I did not know that. So that's awesome. I'm glad I learned something here today too. Okay, so let's talk about the benefits of NCE, right? Obviously, first and foremost, there's going to be less competition, right? Your USA jobs vacancy announcements have hundreds and hundreds, and if not, it's so many that they've begun to limit, many of the agencies have begun to limit, they'll put the vacancy announcement out, and they'll say this job is open for applying for, until August 1st, or the time at which we receive 300 applications, or whatever they put, right? Because they have to go through all those applications, and there's so many. So that's why you want to apply actually quickly for those kinds of jobs that are posted, the regular ones. Now that's different than typically your NCE pool, right? Your NCE pool, now they oftentimes do, they might post it on USA Jobs. Other times they'll post it on CareerLink, and people will find out, and they don't, you can get around the normal standard application system. Like, you don't necessarily have to submit maybe a federal resume, or it can be much simpler and direct to an individual that you're applying to, instead of going through the whole, the competitive service like jobs, when it's a normal vacancy, they get all of their applications, right? And then you have the HR people who have to go through and look at each and every application. None of this like ATS, applicant tracking system, where they just pull things out. They have to look at every application, their resume and such, and figure out, do they have the qualified amount of experience? Do they have the 3 years in project management? Oh, I see 2 years here. They've got to look. It is grueling. I could not see myself in that position. I don't think I would do very well in that position. But so in a standard one, that's what they have to do, right? Then they basically come up with, what's the best qualified? They'll have the best qualified, the qualified, and the unqualified. And it's usually only the best qualified, which is maybe the top 10%, 20%. It's not a lot, right? That go on to the second stage, and that's where a panel of whether in the hiring department and beyond, a panel will look at the resumes and sift through those and see which ones they want to interview. Then you'll have excuse me, a separate interview panel where the people will be brought in. So you can see how long this is, right? This is just, getting that part done. And then once they've interviewed you, then they've got to, decide, okay, what are the highest ranking ones and who do they want to go with? HR has to look at all of the background info to make sure that this has been a fair and equitable, whatever, that it would be that higher. Then they have to check references, right? So the, the offer, or the tentative offer, can only come from HR, not from the supervisor. So there's all these, it's just such a long process. So it's great when you have NCE, and it can really speed up things. And you don't have to be the most qualified candidate either, if that makes sense. You don't have to be the highest, like in the standard way. You've got to be among those highest ones to get even in front of the hiring manager, right? With NCE, as long as you meet the minimum requirements for the job, you could be hired without, even if there's somebody else that's more qualified than you, because it's a special hiring authority. And so they could look at you and bring you on much quicker, much easier, and without you being, the top qualified candidate. So obviously that's why it's really in demand, right? A lot of federal agencies, federal hiring agencies, officials, they love NCE, and they love RPCVs because they know they're great candidates and all of that too. So that's how it works. Okay, so let's see if there are any questions, Jonathan, on NCE as a whole, and then of course I can answer some federal hire ones as well, general ones, with any time that we have left. So dump those in as well. You're more than welcome to do that. And in the meantime, while those are coming, I'm just going to give you some advice on how to market NCE. You want to include your NCE everywhere. By that I mean on your resume, in your cover letter, on your LinkedIn profile. Maybe in your LinkedIn profile, it might even be one of the header, or right up in that, non-competitive eligibility, special hiring authority. People understand the special hiring authority, like everyone, all people in government and such understand, oh, special hiring authority. There's lots of different special hiring authorities, right? There's there's for vets, there's for, what is it, disability, I'm forgetting there's lots of different special hiring authorities, and Peace Corps is one of them. So include that everywhere. When you're networking, reference it, like let people know, because the more you let people know, and now, if they don't have any idea what it is, you'd want to do that for like federal hire people, or people who maybe know people who work in federal, and or just explain it to them in a simple way. I qualify for non-competitive eligibility for my Peace Corps service, which is a special hiring authority that allows an agency to bring me in much quicker and easier, and without the full posting of the traditional vacancy announcement, right? So so that's one way to actually do that on your resume, maybe right up front in your first category of key qualifications, or if you're using a profile or whatever, or even under your name, NCE, qualify for non-competitive, or special hiring authority, qualify for non-competitive eligibility, however you want to say it, right? Peace Corps, get that in there, and you could put the reference, the number, the Executive Order 11103, or the CFR number if you wanted. But I mean, you could have that. But then you would want to turn in, if you're saying that on a resume and you're applying for a job, include your proof of your NCE, description of service, and your or whatever your proof of your NCE when you're applying is important. So just putting it out there to people and letting them know, right? In your cover letter, you can easily include that. I would say I'd have it right up front, in that first short paragraph. I am eligible for non-competitive, I qualify for non-competitive eligibility based on successful Peace Corps service, something so that they see it, because and you might even bold it, right? Like bold that little phrase, or non-competitive eligibility, or special hiring authority, whatever, because that can really help you. Just get that word out there. LinkedIn, when you're doing your, like I said, when you're doing your networking and all of that, put it out there and on your profile, in your, all of those things. So that's any questions on like how to include NCE in your application, in your your marketing materials, if you will. I just did a session last night actually, on branding, coming up with your personal brand, and marketing that. And part of your brand as a Peace Corps volunteer is your non-competitive eligibility, and that and all of those other things that you have as well. So any questions coming in there, Jonathan, or are we?
Jody, there is some questions here.
Sure.
Deborah, thanks for your patience. Deborah had asked these questions. First of all, do you foresee, Jody, virtual federal hiring fairs occurring in a year's time? And then also, how useful would it be to try to find federal human resource specialists to contact for when you do apply for federal jobs with NCE?
Okay, so the first part of that, I certainly hope there will be some sort of virtual hiring event. I would love to, personally, I would love to have us be able to, pull one off with, maybe Peace Corps, and working together where, we'd love to do something like that, a virtual one, because I think it would just be so helpful. Now, in the past, I know there have been, when I was in Peace Corps, we were thinking about this for some time. We were like, we want to do a virtual one, because although we would get around to different areas, we'd go to San Francisco and Chicago and different regions, and then people would kind of come from different areas. We fully acknowledge that not everybody can just up and travel extensively either, and so we really were wanting to do a virtual career fair. And it wasn't just a virtual NCE one or a virtual federal one, but a lot of the participants in our career fairs are federal, because they really do like NCE and RPCVs. So to answer your question, we had tried to do one. We had run into problems initially with just the extreme money. It was so expensive to have the technology of being able to feature each one, where people could go in and listen to their little spiel, and then get put into the right interview room, or where you'd have some one-on-one time with them. And at the time, and we're exploring this option right now to see if maybe prices have come down, But we just ran on a shoestring budget. I mean, we did not have that much money to do what, what we wanted to do. And so hopefully maybe there's some variation. I mean, now I think it's promising even within Zoom, I think you can have up to, is it 30 groups or something, breakout groups? So there might be some way we could do a variation of it where maybe each employer had a few minutes, 5-10 minutes to kind of tell their story, and we had it in a certain order. And then we divided them in breakout groups, whether it's by employer or by industry, depending on how big it is and how many participants, to have people be able to hear a little more about that sector or specific jobs or opportunities, and then maybe connect them with the people to follow up individually, if that makes sense. So I'm working on it, and I would love to do one sooner than later. So keep posted, and we'll keep you posted. You keep tuned in to the Global Reentry program, and we'll hopefully have something of that sort as much as possible. But to your second part, which you said, is it worthwhile connecting with hiring officials during this time? Now, do you mean following up with like the NCE announcements that are on CareerLink and getting in touch with them, or trying to find new contacts in other agencies that haven't posted yet? That would be my, I guess, question for you, because that's a different approach, right? I would absolutely, even though we're in this virtual or arena right now because of COVID-19 and all of those implications, people are hiring. HR, I mean, federal agencies are hiring, and NCE is one of their big ways they like to hire. So stay tuned to CareerLink, right? Which I think Jonathan put in the chat box there. It was just peacecorps.gov/CareerLink, and look at the positions that are there, apply for those positions. But the other thing that I would recommend that you do, and oftentimes agencies, what they'll do is they'll have 2 vacancy announcements. They'll do one for NCE, right? And then they'll do the standard one for, that's the catch-all that's open to all US citizens or whatever, right? So definitely apply. I would say apply to both. I mean, I know the other one takes longer and such, and in my mind, if they find somebody in the NCE, they shouldn't, have to maybe go to the other, but they do it oftentimes to cover their bases, because if they only were to post it as non-competitive eligibility as an NCE vacancy, and for whatever reason they didn't find somebody in that one, they went through the process, they thought they had some good candidates, and they fell through, then they would be starting at ground zero, which, as you can imagine, is a long, process I've discussed. They'd be starting all over again. So they don't want to do that. So a lot of times they'll post to multiple, multiple sources or to multiple candidates. And if you qualify as more than one, there's nothing that keeps you from applying. And once you get your application in, USA Jobs, once you get your resume, like you can keep up to 5 different versions of your resume. Once you get those loaded up, you can actually then tailor it quite easily. It's not that hard to tailor it to the new, other jobs that you're going for. And then, of course, when you push submit, it's going to submit a PDF of that. So don't worry. It's not like if you make more changes on it, it'll change what was sent. It sends a PDF. So that's good. So I hope that helps.
There's another question from Joanna, who says, I was offered a job through the NCE process.
Yep.
Do you know what the process looks like after you are offered the job?
So if you received your tentative, you probably received what's called the tentative offer based on successful background check, maybe, right? That could be it. And then your formal offer is when, I mean, they're giving you the salary, and a lot of times they'll give you the information when they give you your tentative one, and they'll say you are just pending for your background check, which can take a little while, depending on what kind of a job it is, depending on the extent of, certainly if you needed any kind of clearance, that takes a lot longer. But the standard level, the basic level, doesn't usually take that long. That said, we're in a weird environment right now where it's not exactly the norm, so it might take a little bit longer. But what you could certainly do is, I don't know when they came with you with the offer, but I'm sure you replied to say thank you so much if you are planning to go forward with it. I'm thrilled to hear, to receive this tentative offer, as I remain deeply, or I look forward to joining in the whatever capacity. You could certainly ask, what is the projected timeline once the tentative offer, is extended for clearing or whatever, just for planning purposes. That's perfectly fine to ask. So, and you could reach out to them if you haven't heard anything. I mean, it's common that you don't hear anything. I mean, it could easily be a week, even 2 weeks, whatever. Don't stress. If they've given you the tentative offer, they've already done that, right? But you could certainly touch base and just say, just wanted to touch base with you and, tell you, and just wanted to check in, thanks so much again, for the offer. I'm looking forward to starting, just checking in on a projected timeline for, finishing the whatever clearance process or whatever it is. You could certainly do that. Okay. Any other questions up to here? Oh, sorry, Jonathan, you're muted. What was that?
That's the question so far.
Okay, great. Awesome. We'll go on then. So where do you find the NCE jobs? I've already indicated the career link is one of, if not the best source for the NCE jobs. It has, a comprehensive, there's a lot of people who post on there. That said, not everyone posts on there. And so sometimes in your networking, which is another thing that I listed here, mentioning it everywhere, right? Because if you're networking, you're talking to different, people, you're expanding your network through LinkedIn, through whatever, through career chats, where you chat with people about their own experience, you certainly can say, I, as a returned Peace Corps volunteer, I have the special hiring authority of, non-competitive eligibility, which allows an employer to bring me on much easier as long as I meet the minimum qualifications and, that kind of thing. Are you at all familiar with that hiring, authority? And they may or may not be, but if they're not, you might share a little bit of information with them. But just to say, it's, what recommendations would you have for someone such as myself who has a special hiring authority, of NCE and, in moving forward and getting the word out to prospective employers. I mean, so it's all about, like, a lot of times and I can't tell you how many times I've heard of this happening, but where not employees, RPCDs would be doing their networking, doing their due diligence and career chats with different people, and they'd be talking to a federal person. And in the course of that, conversation, the person would learn they had NCE, and they'd say, wait, you have NCE? Oh my gosh. And they would be able to apply, or, whatever, be considered for a job that's, that, was there. And I remember hearing one where literally, the person got so excited, they said, wait a minute, I'll be right back. And they left the room. They brought back this other, their manager, the hiring official, and literally wanted to hire them. They're like, we want you. We want you to, I mean, she didn't even have a formal interview. She had been talking to them and interacting, and they were impressed by how, she was, very articulate, very, good. They knew she had solid experiences, including Peacecorps. And I mean, I'm not saying expect that to happen, that's like the best case scenario, but put it out there. And if you put it out there, it could happen, or it could ease your ability to find different federal jobs that are, wanting to hire through NCE. USA jobs. You can also do USA jobs and filter for the Peace Corps hiring path, Peace Corps /Vista, and I have a slide on this. I think it's the next slide, but this is the standard. I mean, USA jobs is the central headquarters for federal employment in general. If you don't have any special hiring authority, you're definitely going through USA jobs to be hired, right? So you can filter through job openings and look only for jobs that have this hiring path. And then it'll show you the ones that qualify. You need to read the other qualifications because sometimes there's other things that you need that you may not have, but it's a good way to really filter through it. So, all right. And then here's what I was talking about, finding NCE vacancies. So this is part of this. I lifted this from, the Peace Corps site, but this is, I was talking about Career Link and the results. I wanted you to see how many they had. I've already talked about it, so I won't go into more detail, but it just, that's what the screen will look like. And the arrow will show you where you can just click on only show non-competitive eligibility. So there's 721 current vacancies. And then of that, I think it was 200 and something, high 200s that were NCE only. So, all right. And then working at Peace Corps, I want to talk, because this is a little bit confusing. It can be. Peace Corps has an NCE roster, which is basically, it's a general vacancy announcement that they put out usually twice a year maybe, and it has a long open time. It's like a continuous open, right? It'll close eventually, but usually it's for like a 4 to 6 month maybe period of time. So it's a long period of time that's open, and it allows people with NCE to put their application in and, submit their, required documentation, for NCE, and be considered for multiple vacancies. So the entire agency, all the different departments have access, or they don't have access to it directly, but they ask HR. They say, we're looking for somebody for this kind of a position, da, 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 da. And Peace Corps will run through the roster and give them people who meet their criteria. And then they can reach out to them and do so. So you may be contacted for a job that you never applied for, which is great, right? Kind of strange in some ways, but definitely through the Peace Corps headquarters one, that's oftentimes how it can happen. And that's wonderful. If you are contacted for a job and they say, we want to interview you, and this is the job, we found your thing on the NCE, roster, there's nothing wrong with, and you should ask for that job description. Say, wonderful, I'm really excited about this opportunity and look forward to speaking with you. Do you by chance have a job description or vacancy announcement that I might look at in preparation for the interview? That shows you as somebody who's put together, who's on top of it, and it'll help you to make the best case for yourself when you go in. When you're going in for a job that you never applied for and you don't have any, application materials for it, it's really hard to tailor yourself to meet, what that job really is, maybe. Okay. So if you have questions about that, you can contact the HRM jobs at peacecorps.gov. The only thing I would say about that is I don't want them to get inundated with, too many. I would say look online first to see if you see it. But if you don't see it there, you could, just reach out and just say, wondering when the next, Peace Corps NCE vacancy roster, NCE, vacancy program will, be put out, and they can help you out. Okay. All right. And then to learn more, so NCE, the one-stop shop. That's part of it's on the Peace Corps website. If you just go to peacecorps.gov/NCE, and there's a lot of information for you. There's information for the employer. So if you come across an employer who's not as familiar, because not everyone is, right? You can send them some information, some links to information, so that they can get more educated on it and potentially be able to bring you on. Who knows? And NC information for federal agencies in general. This is the employer promotional material. So that's a really good link to send to those employers who maybe don't know as much about NCE but want to learn about it. So, and then if you need a copy of your DOS, now in your case, I'm hoping that most of you have your DOS by now, or are you still, or is anyone still working on trying to get the DOS done? Or received from Peace Corps headquarters? You have to do some, I think, information on it, work on it on the front end where you actually write it. And if you're still working on it, I would definitely say be as specific as possible in terms of including numbers, like the number of people you reached in whatever programming, or the quantity, the number, the amount of money you received in a grant, things like that. All those tangible, like, as some people said, if it's not in your DOS, like, it didn't happen. And I think I would say I wouldn't want it to have every single thing, because I don't want it to be a 3-page, so long where it's just, not readable. But you want to put the main accomplishments and main points and things. And if you're somebody who was evacuated, shortly after you swore in, where you don't feel like you have anything to put, trust me, you have things that you can put. Look to your pre-service training and some of the community initiatives. I think you do like workshop things, and you do different skills-based, community-based activities, hands-on activities. Look to those. Look to the plans, created, whatever. Maybe you didn't receive the grant, but you, planned and, authored, independently authored grant, or $5,000 grant, for whatever. You still authored it. Even if you didn't get it, if you got it, wrote, received, and implemented, X number amount grant to, raise blah, blah, blah. So that, yeah, that can help too. So just a little bit of suggestions on there as well. And then if you do have questions about your copy of your DOS, you've submitted what you need to a long time ago and you still haven't gotten it, you can reach out to certify@peacecorps.gov. Just realize that right now is a really tough time also for the agency. They're working at bare staff, bare staff and bare minimum, and really and just are overwhelmed with 7,000 requests or people versus 3 countries worth. So just realize that as well. Okay. And then lastly, I did want to show you, as I promised, the USA Jobs. You can use the filters when you go into USA Jobs, and and you are like, you want to do a search for a job, there's all kinds of filters you can use, right? But one of them is going to be, like by filters, and it'll have hiring authorities. And the one that says Peace Corps / Vista is what it'll usually say. The little icon here, I noticed more recently that they might have changed the little inside. It used to be more of almost this globe, and now I think the last time I saw it, it almost looked like not a web, but kind of like a circle with lines through it, almost like the globe that way, but very similar. It's purple colored is what it has been. Look for, click on that filter and any other filters that you qualify for, right? Yeah, so click on those as well. Okay, so are there any other questions? My goodness, we are right at the top of the hour again, Jonathan, twice in a row, that we've almost stayed to that exact 1 hour.
No questions further yet, but let's see
Okay.
any more come in here.
Please put them in the chat box if you do have questions about NCE. I hope that your silence means that we've answered everything and then some. But if you do have additional questions, you can also reach out to me later at careers@peacecorpsconnect.org. Can you throw that in the chat box, Jonathan? You're awesome. I appreciate it. careers@peacecorpsconnect.org. And yeah, I'm happy to chat and answer other questions as well. And then I think, lastly, hopefully there's some more questions that are coming in. A few, I'm willing to stay on certainly for a few minutes, but please do let other people know if you can, if you got something out of this one, or I think we're going to be doing this one again. We're scheduled to do it again next week. And a variety of other ones. We have different webinars every month. So come back. We'd love to see you on these and in some other contexts too. So let folks know on, the COVID-19 group. I know I've been on there to see, there's great stuff and resources on there as well. But just help us to get the word out, because we want to help as many people as possible that have been impacted by COVID-19 or beyond, other RPCVs as well who are chiming in. So.
And one other thing just I'll add is that hopefully you've been to our website, which is peacecorpsconnect.org. And we are an organization which is driven in many ways, but driven in part by affiliate groups all around the country. And within that network of affiliate groups are a number of groups that have organized through federal agencies. So there might be a federal agency you're particularly interested in, and there's the potential to connect with some fellow RPCVs who are working there. There are, Jody, you probably know better than I know there's RPCVs at the State Department.
Oh yeah, the employer, I mean, they're all over. There's a lot of them are in federal agencies, NASA, DOL, GSA, State Department. I mean, there's so many of the employer affiliate groups. There really are. And you will see actually when you go onto the peacecorps.gov/careers, where there'll be job search tips and such. There will be many, and I think we have some on ours too that link directly to it. There'll be different employer info sessions where you'll have maybe an agency that it's a pre-recorded event, and it allows you to get more insight. And oftentimes those are conducted by the employer resource, groups who maybe have the people that are on the panel who are answering questions and talking about opportunities. Okay, great. I do want to answer one last question here, and then I think we're maybe through them. But Deborah, and I know she had to go, but hopefully she can watch the recording here, finding email addresses of HR specialists who've not yet posted jobs, or for when I do apply. And then she says, I'll have NCE in 8 months. Sorry to have to go. Okay. So with the email addresses of HR specialists, like sometimes they will put, they're actually required on a regular posting in federal government to put some contact information there. That's a law now. But whether it'll be a general or a person's name. But what I would caution you to do is try not to overwhelm them with too many emails, especially when they're in a period where it's maybe crazy like this, right now in our current environment. But you can certainly try to get, like, if it's one that you've applied for and then you haven't heard anything, or you're interested, you could certainly reach out to them and just, don't be shocked if you don't get a response, but you might get a response saying, hey, it's taking a little longer, that kind of thing. It's hard to know them for the ones that haven't yet posted jobs. I think that you'd probably be talking more networking when you're like reaching out and trying to connect with different HR people. I would say you'd be better served in that to talk with your connections, right? Reach out, try to, do a career chat with, somebody that might work at Department of Labor, and then, get their insight and, and who they, who else might have, insight into this, or what other recommendations would you have? Are there specific hiring, you know, um, you know, are there general inboxes for people who are interested? Do they use NCE very much? You can get some of that information, and they might be like, I don't know as much, but I know somebody in HR. Let me connect you with them, and then that's where you get more of that person's name and such. So great. I think that it looks like we've come to the end of the questions. Thank you so much to those who have participated today, and we very much look forward to seeing you in other events and helping in any way we can. Hope you have a great weekend, and we will go ahead and sign off here. I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks so much.